Hello everyone and welcome back to another Backlot Banter movie review. My name is SRK. Today I'm joined by my little soldier, Tanner Dykstra, and today we're here to talk about the new Shah Rukh Khan movie, Jawan. We saw Pathaan earlier this year and we loved that movie. And so you tell us two in 1 year, two action movies from SRK in 1 year, we have to go see Jawan.
You spoil us.
Thank you. And this features double the SRK, Tanner. This is twice the amount of SRK we got in Pathaan. But if you have seen Jawan, please talk to us about it. Talk to us about, I don't know, your other favorite SRK movies. Recommend us stuff. We like watching movies. We're crazy. But Tanner, this is a big movie. Subscribe to our channel. That SRK would want you to. All right? All right, guys? I agree. He told me.
He loves
We go way back. Tanner, we have seen Jawan, and it was a hell of a ride, and I'd like to know your thoughts on this movie.
Tucker, you're so right that we've been spoiled by SRK horror movies this year.
Other version. Let's go with action.
Sorry. What did I?
You said
I meant
horror.
action movies.
That would be interesting, but it certainly was not that.
Tucker, we've been spoiled by SRK action movies so far this year, with Pathaan opening up this year and setting a bar, and then Jawan, I think surpassing it. Yeah. I think I prefer this one to Pathaan, actually. I think there's a lot of interesting things at play in Atlee's Jawan, outside of just the balls-to-the-walls action that we've become accustomed to nowadays. I think there are some themes that I think are both strong and maybe strengths and weaknesses of the film at the same time. But as you said, Shah Rukh Khan is pulling double duty in this thing, and he's doing a great job. Yeah. And I'm loving every second of it. And he's in some great makeup and some great costumes. More generally, just having a fantastic time flexing his action muscles, his comedy muscles, his drama muscles. It's basically everything you would want in a movie, all wrapped up into one.
Yeah, I think what is so much fun about watching Jawan is you don't know where it's going to go next. Because you and I watched the trailer for this. And it's ostensibly, especially because we only speak English, we had no godforsaken idea what was going on in this trailer. And that was maybe the best way to go into this, because other than a couple of crazy shots in SRK being either cool or funny, depending on what the scenario calls for, or scary occasionally. He's a little bit intimidating sometimes. We didn't know what to expect. And Jawan is the kind of movie that takes you on a ride, especially if you have basically no context going in. You don't know who he is, you don't know what his goals are, you don't know where it's going, you don't know what his relationship with other people are, and I found that ride to be really compelling because it's structured in a very unique way in that you aren't given a lot of information about the characters at the beginning, and it's up to the pacing of this movie and its twist to fill you in on the characters' motivations across the entire runtime. And I really, really liked how on the edge of my seat, that structure kept me. And not only that, I think as you were mentioning, the movie just hits a lot of really high marks. I think it's got some really interesting themes. It's a lot more thematic than most of the other big budget action movies that we get. SRK is pulling a lot of different duties when it comes to the acting that he's pushed to do in these scenes. And I really think I appreciated the action a lot more here because it's a lot more hand-to-hand combat and like really interesting choreography as opposed to what Pathaan did, which was compelling in its own way, but that was a lot of so much CGI, like insane, superhuman nonsense. But this was more grounded. I use some air quotes there because there's some ridiculous stuff in this movie, but it was more grounded and it felt a lot more slick and there was a lot more like kineticism too. And I think this movie also just feels really unique because it's pulling threads and ideas from all across the film industry. We probably referenced a dozen movies while we were watching this movie, and it manages to fit all those camps really well.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of feeling tropey, it still manages to feel fresh.
Absolutely, definitely.
And speaking of tropey, I wanted to ask about the twist. Okay, I wanted to ask about this. Yeah, because spoilers or no spoilers, how we riding this thing out? Are we just doing full spoilers right away?
I think we got to go full spoilers. Look, if you have not seen this movie, don't listen to the rest of this review. Again, this movie is best with as little information as you can get. Just going in, being ready for the ride. Strong recommend from both of us. You're not going to get our scores yet. You're not going to get our full breakdown of the movie, but just trust us on this one. Full spoilers.
Because I think it is important to go full spoilers. So here we go. So the twist of this movie, I think, is quite interesting because a lot of your action thrillers are going to have that third act twist to go into it. And whether it's the writing of this movie or whether it's, us just generally being quite unfamiliar with it,
Yeah.
as opposed to many of the other films
Sure.
that we go to see it in theaters.
That's true. We've only seen the trailer once for this, and we didn't understand it, as opposed to Haunted Mansion and these in Strays and these movies we can quote the lines along with in the theater because we've seen the trailer for 8 months.
Yes. But even if I can't predict the twists in some other films, they don't feel surprising or exciting to me, and that is not the case here in Jawan. It was an extremely exciting, extremely interesting twist that, here we go, SRK is playing both, is playing a son and a father.
Yes, Azad and Vikram. Yeah,
exactly. And that is the third twist is that Vikram comes to save his son from the bad guys. He comes to show up, kick some ass, and whip some dudes with a sweet metal belt.
And then hit us with intermission, or interval as they call it.
Exactly. And then that sort of that allows us to completely reanalyze the timeline of the film, the structure of the film. And while we don't get a time to sort of take that in, you are still on that cliff, that roller coaster ride that is Jawan. It does make you think about it, and while it may not be completely watertight,
sure,
I think it is nonetheless exciting and fun.
Yeah, that is the thing that I will most compliment and criticize this movie for simultaneously, is that it does fail in some areas. When you start to break down what are the themes and the motivations of some of these characters, what is the timeline here, especially when it comes to relationships with antagonists, that gets a little bit muddy. I think the antagonists on the whole are a little bit muddy in this movie.
Sure.
But the movie is compelling as you're watching it, and it continues to ramp up, and things continue to get revealed that really kept me engaged. And while I would say that Vikram showing back up and rescuing Azad is definitely the main twist of this movie, because up to that point I'm I thought I saw SRK playing multiple characters in the trailer, but I was oh, okay, maybe it's just him with a bald cap and that's just a costume. But then it turns out he is actually pulling double duty, and there are more characters to learn about. I did like that. That is the main twist of the movie, but I think that the fact that this movie has multiple twists that sort of reframe the way that the story is going to be looked at for the rest of the runtime, and then you look back retroactively on what happened before. The first of those being when he looks to get married to the woman that is the head police detective that they've been sort of spy versus spy, going after one another for the entire first third or two-fifths of the movie, and then they get married, and you're oh, this is so I can't this is gonna be so interesting. I can't wait to see the conflict that boils from this, and that of course comes to a head in multiple places. And then we also get a good set of backstory twists that reinform what comes before and after, with learning about Vikram's backstory, with being a soldier and having his wife be sent to jail, and how Azad grew up as a child in a prison, and how that informed his life choices, wanting to defend people and to reform prison systems. There's a lot of interesting nuance to the characters that, again, aren't revealed until certain intervals throughout the movie. And I really like the fact that we didn't know everything going in. These characters were aware of the situation, and it wasn't until we were filled in that we were oh, that thing that didn't make much sense earlier actually was thought through. We just weren't given that final puzzle piece.
Yeah, and there's a good mix of the writer and director Atlee leaving you out of that and letting you discover something in a twist, as well as just the classic fun stuff of you're along with the ride with our protagonist Azan, and he is basically deceiving his wife to be Narmada.
Yeah,
and that reveal when you when he opens the door, and it's the police chief, the negotiator, who's trying to hunt him down and put him in prison for all the staged terrorist attacks that he's been doing. That's a great moment.
Absolutely.
That's a oh god, we're in for something special for a while here, and we are. It's very fun. The little girl is also super funny.
She's really good, and she has great chemistry with SRK. Their back and forth is just gold. This movie has a really interesting comedic edge to it, which I think is what keeps it feeling fresh. It's never just serious action. Of course, there are some serious actions, and there's some really dark themes and some dark stuff in this movie. But I like that it's able to balance some just straight up comedy scenes, especially when the little girl, I can't remember the character's name, but when she first shows up at Azad's house, and there's just this whole funny sequence, and then everything that has to do with that is just so funny. And then less than 15 minutes later, we're getting information about farmers killing themselves
Yes.
and like mafia members coming around and like harassing people and like the dark side of politics in India.
Uh-huh.
I'm like, wow, this movie really balances itself well, but I like the fact that it's able to have both sides.
Yeah. Looking back on it, I'm like, yeah, it is like kind of a whiplashy film, but for whatever reason, I don't think you feel that in the theater as much. I think it is like I remember feeling like, oh, now we're in like a serious scene, but
Exactly.
it didn't feel super like I feel like we get cut short,
Yeah.
or I feel like
Well,
it
they
was too
also
harsh
don't
of a
undercut
transition.
either the jokes or the serious moments. When you're in a
Yeah.
serious scene, you're in a serious scene, and this is a serious thing that the characters care
Right.
about, that is
Right.
taken serious, and there's serious music and serious editing and serious
Well, I think
cinematography.
that's also just because Indian action films, as I think it was as we have discovered,
Yeah.
are just much more earnest when they are being
Oh,
serious
definitely. Yeah,
than the current crop of American action films
definitely.
by and large. By and large, um,
Actually, I do have one thing that I think is the reason why this balance between both dark themes and interesting comedy tie together so well, and that's because this movie starts off in a place that is intertwined with that. It is the scene of Azad playing Vikram on this train as a terrorist, holding people
yeah,
hostage, and you don't know what
yeah,
his motivations are, and you don't know who he is, and you don't know why he's there, and it's
hmm
serious and it's dark, and this is a scary scene because there's 6 girls with guns and a crazy guy
and he
on this
killed
train, and
somebody.
he killed
Yeah,
someone exactly. But then he's doing a little dance and he's playing a song and he's got a ball
yeah.
cap on. He's kind of like doing these funny moves, and you're like, "What the hell's
He's
wrong
got
with
his
this
little
guy?" But
sunglasses.
yeah, he looks funny, and you're confused, but you're also like laughing. You're like, "This is comedy, but it's
And
also
just
really
because,
serious," and he's
yeah,
playing that balance really well.
it's because he's so charismatic.
Absolutely.
It cannot be understated, and this is not news to anyone, that Shah Rukh Khan is a very
Yes. Yes.
charismatic screen
Yes.
presence, and has been for decades now.
Yeah.
I also want to point out that we looked up his age. He's 57. Feels so youthful on
Absolutely.
screen.
Oh yeah.
As opposed to a film, the last Indian film that we watched and
Hmm.
reviewed, Jailer. I did feel
Yeah.
the stars age a bit more in that film,
Definitely. Well,
and
also because Rajnikanth is just like standing there in a lot of the
yeah,
action
a lot.
sequences, which
Yes.
is not the case here. There's some
No.
crazy kinetic action. People are flipping, legs are going in the air. It doesn't even make sense physics wise, and they're kicking people and they're doing like triple backflips in the air before they
Mm.
land. And before they land, you're getting 3 more kicks in. It's like, what the fuck is happening here?
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, the age is also a thing that we, it is a strength and also something that we kind of laughed at because, like, yeah, he's 57 and can play younger, but not like 20 as they maybe try to convince us sometimes that he
Yes,
is. But
occasionally.
like 30, sure, absolutely, got it, nailed it. Tucker, what else about Jawan? What else did we like here?
I think that another thing about this movie is that it's just really rock solid from like a filmmaking perspective. I thought the
Sure,
editing and the sound design especially were really, really good.
thank
You're
you.
getting a lot of insert shots and it's cutting around, so you really get a good perspective on these really complicated like set piece
Yeah,
moments that are terrorist sequences with people in different places, and some people know certain things, but it's really easy to understand and take in, and you feel like you're along with the ride because the editing and the sound design and the cinematography all work together to where you're getting a shot sequence that's boom, 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 but it feels and flows so naturally that you're able to follow some pretty complicated and like wide-reaching things.
absolutely. From a plot standpoint, and as you said, from an action scene standpoint, I think back to what is probably my favorite, my two favorite action sequences in the film are probably when the real Vikram shows up and
Yeah,
saves Azad, and the final action sequence in the prison.
sure,
I
that
think
is great. Yeah,
are my two favorites, just because it's kind of like two SRKs fucking shit up and
absolutely.
taking names. I think that's the best stuff. And there's truck chase, and there's so many good things that
Yeah,
we can mention. But the editing as well on a plot level is quite strong when you are jumping around to different stories,
sure.
different points in time. When which SRK are we following? Are we
Hmm.
following Assad? Are we following Vikram? Which one is it? I think we've viewed enough Indian action films now to kind of say that like they do this thing where like, okay, we finished an act, we finished like a set piece here, now let's completely rewind and like go to a flashback for 20 minutes,
Hmm.
and we'll do that a number of times through the film, and I think Sometimes it's pulled off quite well, sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
And Jawan pulled off very well, and that's just because of the editing and pacing of this film, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Do we want to touch on the political themes? Because that's something that we both sort of walked away with this film being quite compelled by and
definitely.
interested by.
I think that might be the element where this film clearly stands above as more interesting and thought through than some of the other movies we've seen. I loved With Thought. I really liked Jailer. But these aren't movies with a lot of message. They're just supposed to be crazy and ridiculous and see a really charismatic guy kick some ass. But this movie does that. But while I think it doesn't stick the landing, throughout the movie, it's compelling with some really interesting political themes that, especially for people that aren't versed in Indian politics at all, like ever, never mentioned in our presence, this movie gives you a really interesting insight to some of the issues that people are facing over there. Namely, farmers committing suicide. I don't know how real this is, but in this movie, farmers commit suicide to get out of the debt that they owe. And that is a really harrowing thing that impacts characters in really interesting ways and motivates Azad to commit acts of terrorism that inspire the country around him. And the idea of this guy who's causing terrorist acts and having all the media attention put onto him because it's the craziest thing that's happening that day, but then having it be like genuinely inspiring to the people of India is really, really compelling. He's like a next level modern day Robin Hood, as they referenced throughout the movie. But I find that concept to be maybe the most interesting this film has going for it. Is it's a guy who's motivated to cause crazy scenarios and defend himself and defend his honor in crazy ways, motivated by very, if not real, but realistically portrayed political actions. Yes. It's like, look, things aren't working. Someone's got to be the catalyst for change, and whether that's the farmers committing suicide or the medical industry not being properly
the government
supported
hospitals,
by the government and hospitals across the nation not receiving proper equipment and care, that is like a really interesting topic. And then it causes these crazy action sequences with interesting characters to be set up. It just, unfortunately, by the end of the movie, especially with the last sort of rallying cry that SRK gives, which is a good scene, it doesn't stick its own landing, and you're left a little bit confused of what is the political message of this movie. It's supposed to be rousing. It's supposed to get you to think about these issues that aren't covered in this way, and it is very politically compelling from that angle. But at the end of the movie, it leaves you with this message of make sure you think before you vote. And it's like that's what I mentioned to you.
That's what I mentioned to you on our drive back from seeing this. Is like, the first like two big like terrorist action scenes are very like they're very sharp, they're very incisive, they're very cutting to the point of this is a problem, this is what needs to happen, then this is the root cause. And a lot of times it's government corruption, it's private influence in public officials and stuff like that. And then Azad's final message to the people of India is, and question the people that you vote for.
Which is a good message, but as I think we were talking about last night, it's a softball message compared to the crazy rallying cries that the movie sets up earlier. Though I think I will maybe justify it a little bit and say why it's like not a huge problem for me, is that it is the most realistic rallying cry for this movie to end on. The things that are setting up before are so like high concept and so many different things impacting them that of course it's solved very easily by one guy doing these things. But the actual message at the end being something that's reasonable for the average Indian citizen to do, I think kind of makes sense to leave this in a place that is both politically compelling, but also like realistic for most people to actually take as a message to their life.
I mean, I can see that. I just think that it's incongruous with, like, the very progressive, radically progressive actions that he was taking earlier in the film. And then, this is not unique to Indian cinema by any measure. There has been much conversation around, like, so-called socially progressive media here in the States, sort of softballing it and not really committing to its own talking points when it comes time to bring it all home to roost. So it's just something that like I call it out when I see it here, and I again, though interesting in Jawan, in seeing it through an Indian lens, nonetheless I have to call it out when I see it there.
Yeah, let's talk about a couple of other relatively minor criticisms for me, but still some criticisms. Okay. The main villain, Kali, played by Vijay Sethupathi, is well portrayed. He's got an interesting presence. He's got an interesting relationship, especially with Vikram, as we learn throughout the course of the movie. But I found the antagonists in this movie that weren't his not wife and then wife Narmada. She was great. But the other villains, the male antagonists, they were, I didn't really understand like what they were doing, or they were mob bosses and they had government power and they had guys that followed them, and at one point I thought there were two guys and then there was one guy and I'm like, wait, is this the same guy? And I couldn't really tell. That I think is just because this movie is so convoluted in its structure. Yeah. I couldn't tell what really was going on with the main
Chuck,
villains.
you remember
of this
the
movie.
Bane mask guy?
Oh, he just was around because he had a cool mask and a cheetah.
His name was Mr. D, by the way. That's fun.
Was?
It was. They said it like once. But he was a weird Russian oligarch, and he had a Bane mask.
Yeah.
And the villain's plan was to go to Russia and convince all these oligarchs to give him money so that he can bribe the citizens of India to vote for preferred candidates in the upcoming election.
So they can control the world, basically.
Yeah, so they could control mostly like factories and not having any regulations on factories and stuff like that. Yada yada yada.
It's very simple. It's a very basic kind of cliche bad guy plan.
His plan is not as important as the revenge plot.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
is the thrust of the whole film.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you could strip out his plan or throughout the entire thing and still have the movie make sense from a progress standpoint, from a story progress standpoint, but it certainly would have helped, I think.
I think that is the one place where I would say the movie's unique structure, where things are not revealed until way into the movie, is at its worst. Because if we had known what, let me get his name again, Kali's plan was from the beginning and why Azad was after him, even if it was just a basic thing, like, he wronged my father, and that is why I'm after this specific subsect of the government, that would have, I think, cleared up things a little bit. It would allow me to focus a little more on Kali because I know what his plan is and why Azad is upset at this. But instead, the movie opts to not really have him feel like too much of an actual presence until that second half of the movie, once Vikram shows back up and we suddenly get the context of, oh, there's this history here, and killing his mother and sending him to jail and throwing Vikram off the plane, which is where we find him at the very beginning of the movie in another great action sequence that reframes things. But at that point, I had already started to forget what was going on with him in that first half. But him and his plot are also only like a fifth or a sixth of the runtime of this movie.
No, it's not a lot of the runtime. But yeah, it is. You know, he is the yang to SRK's yin. So you do have to build him out a little bit. So yeah, I would agree. It didn't bother me as much because I think I was more focused on like I said, the revenge subplot over the international espionage, controlling the government
bosses,
stuff,
government's money. Oh yeah,
exactly. As much as I did love looking at Mr. D all the time,
sure,
and hearing him talk.
There are a few other elements of this film, though. Primarily, I think one that is both a pro and a con for me. This is my final pro and con, and frankly, I'm done with criticisms after this. I don't know if you have any more, but is that Azad has this group of 6 like Charlie's Angels style girls that he's like raised up and trained, and they are inmates in his prison. But is that actually true? It's kind of hard to tell. And it's really interesting, and especially because the movie starts there with introducing this gang. I thought that they were going to be a bigger part of this movie. They're really interesting conceptually. All the actresses are doing a great job. I love that they're there. They build out this world in an interesting way. But by the end of the movie, they're kind of just there to support Azad. And I was hoping for more backstories for these characters, have them have a little more bit of like personality spread between the group of them, because we don't really get to know them very well except for a couple. I thought that it handled fine for what's there, but it was such an interesting concept that it really left me scratching for more. I'm like, I want to know how this group got established and how each of them joined this. And I want to see a flashback to him training 6 girls like it's fucking Master Splinter and his 4 turtles. Like, there is a really interesting history here. And I love this group. And especially as it ties into the larger context of him having 6,000 inmates that all love him. Like, I love this whole fucking thing.
He has an army.
Yeah, it's so fucking good. But it's relatively underserved in the grander scheme of the movie.
I think it's because Atlee may have written himself into a bit of a corner here.
Sure.
By giving us a sweet badass like name,
Yeah.
their like nickname in
Yeah.
the group or whatever, intro for these 6 women, and then we start doing like 10 to 15 minute backstory clips for the first 2.
Mm-hmm.
And then we don't have time again in the film to do that 4 more times.
Yeah.
And it would feel odd, I think, to like do like truncated versions or just like
That's
here's
fair.
the other 4.
Yeah.
So I
the
think
2 that we got though were really interesting, and the way that it played into the themes and the reason that they were doing this specific terrorist attack.
Yeah, I think you're supposed to just sort of infer that they all have a story like that.
Of course I did.
But nonetheless, it is. Yeah, I mean, like, as you said, I think I just infer that, and I love the 2 backstories that we got. Those were some of the most like moving pieces of small scale storytelling that we got.
Absolutely, especially the one with Dr. Ira. Like the idea that she's trying to save all these kids, and everyone's working. They're using the hand pumps because the government hasn't sent them the oxygen tank, and then she gets sent to jail because it's easier for them to put a scapegoat rather than dealing with their problems. Like, wow, this is so interesting politically, and Iram's such an interesting character. Like, you can see like the pain in her eyes as she's going. She's like, I didn't fucking kill them. What are you talking about? And then, unfortunately, that's just not portrayed equally throughout the entire movie. Because then Vikram shows up, and we got to deal with him, and we get a lot of backstory from him. And you know what? Those are great. God, it's so fucking funny. Look, this movie is just. It's so compelling that so many of its elements I just wanted more. And this is an almost 3-hour long movie. And so it wouldn't be really realistic to hope for this to be that much longer. And there's a lot more they could do. But it's a sign of a great movie that my biggest issue with it, other than the politics not landing, is I'm like, man, I would want a sequel to this that is also just more of this exact movie, like maybe not following it up, but like I want to learn more about what happened here. Because what you've really so interesting.
You want the Atlee cut.
I would watch a 4 fucking hour cut of this movie. Absolutely.
Exactly. Tucker, I'm going to go ahead and give Jawan a 8.5 out of 10.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go higher. I'm going to go a 9.3 out of 10. I really think that this movie is what I look for out of action movies. And it frankly surpassed that in some ways. I think it's got one of the most charismatic leads of the year.
For sure.
One of the most unique concepts of the year. Some of the most unique themes and powerful themes of the year. Great comedy, great drama, great action. It really just kind of covers the gamut. And there was very few moments in the movie where I was pulled out by a strange editing choice or a strange writing choice. It all felt very natural. Everyone in the cast is doing an amazing job. Deepika Padukone, who we loved so much. What was she in?
I'll say again, Tucker. Another thing where I'm like, well, I wanted more of her. She didn't get to kick as much ass as I would hope.
She was in Pathaan. Oh, and Brahmastra. She was in both. Yeah, she had a sizable role, but I think it's just probably too expensive to have her on set for that long. But it's just a great movie across the board. It really was fantastic.
100%.
SRK, do another one next year. I fucking dare you.
Do 2 more next year.
You know what?
3.
Why not? Hey. No. We will be here to review any more major Indian action movies as we start to get in our swing of going to these regularly. It's getting more and more fun to be able to recognize these stars. It's our second time seeing SRK on the action screen, and we're just like, oh yeah, and we're gonna be following it. So if you're here for the rest of these movies, you're not gonna be let down because we're gonna review them. Yeah. Tanner, thank you for joining me. Everyone, thank you for listening to our very in-depth discussion about Jawan. Go see it. If you haven't, you got the whole fucking thing spoiled. Oops. Go tell your friends to go see it.
Go see it anyway.
And then tell your friends to watch this review. Wink. And subscribe to Backlog Banter.
Subscribe to Backlog Banter.
Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Tanner, are you ready to record a 15-minute video that will get more views than all the videos we've posted in the last 2 months combined?
God willing.